Okay, so welcome and thanks for joining us. My name's Sue Beardsmore, and today I'm joined by two highly experienced finance professionals to look at the key findings from IFOL's 2025 Finance Leaders Fraud Report and to discuss what they mean and how you can respond. Caroline Adams is the Senior Study Programme Author and Skills Gap Analysis Lead at IFOL. A shared services leader, she has over 40 years' experience in the industry, leading teams through transformations in fast-changing environments. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Sue.
And Connie Hain is the Director of Global Audit Services at SAP Concur, who sponsored today's webinar. Connie, welcome to you. Just tell us a little more about your background and SAP Concur in this context.
Absolutely. Connie Hain, I have been in the industry of non-compliance over 30 years. Again, I love it. I love how our travelers continue to push that non-compliance envelope, and we're always trying to stay 10 steps ahead of them in this process. As for SAP Concur, the area that I work within is the expense report auditing process. So we're looking at 6,000 of our clients' expense reports on a day-to-day basis. We have multiple different services that I will talk through in a little bit, but I'm very excited to be here today to help walk through some of these fun and yet educational topics.
Thanks very much indeed, Connie. And please put any questions you have in the chat. We'll try to pick them up as we go along. We will be asking you to share your experiences with us in a moment. IFOL's annual Finance Leaders Fraud Report has just been published, and it looks to understand the current level of fraud risk that finance leaders and their organisations are experiencing. And the aim is to alert you to where you should be strengthening controls, providing training, and using tools to detect and prevent fraud. Now, one of the ever-presents is fraud perpetrated by employees, and there seems to be an almost endless number of ways that this happens. So could you share any experiences that you have? Just put brief details of anything that you've come across that is extraordinary, you think people should be aware of. You can keep the actual companies anonymous if that's what you want, but just what people should be looking out for. We've put the page up there for you to respond to now. And while you're doing that, those of you that will, and thank you if you do, I'm going to ask Connie, because I know she's been gathering some outrageous expense claim frauds that she's been told about. So tell us about some of those, Connie, while we're waiting to hear others.
Absolutely. Over the years, I've definitely collected, but this past week, we had our global client fusion session, and I captured some fun things out of there. We started out by saying, do I not look amazing? I mean, prior to coming to this event, I went in and got my Botox completed and I got my fingernails completed. So not really, but we do see a lot of them. And yes, Tracy, with you having an upcoming trip tomorrow, I see your nails are beautiful as well. Expensing those?
I don't think so.
Other fun things that we have found. I'll just do one real quick here before we get started. But we had a client where one of their employees had rented a car, landed, rented a car, went to the client meeting. That evening, their car was stolen. And they say it in quotations, it was stolen. So there was authorities were brought into the process, and obviously that employee couldn't return their car. A year and a half later, however, the authorities did find that rental car at the employee's cousin's home. There was some explaining to do when that one was identified. So yes, it's not, there's more than I put the wrong date in, I put the wrong dollar amount in. There's some really unique things employees put on their expense reports, and we'll cover some of those later in today's session.
And when people do that kind of thing, are they expecting to be found out, expecting to get away with it? And also we'll want to know what people should look out for to kind of prevent that happening. It must be a combination of things.
It is. And I always look at it going, you spend more than 10 minutes building your travel and expense. It's more like 10 days, and in some cases, 10 months if you're actually really just digging in. And so you want to make sure that you have some type of compliance check to validate employees are following what you have in your travel and expense policy. And then you want to follow up with reporting, because reporting validates what you expected, what you saw through the audit results. And if you need to make some changes, make those changes. And then that circle happens again. So that would be my process. And I know later on, at the end, there is if you have more questions, but if you do have any questions as I go through this, we would love to answer those. And that is through concur.com. You can, for more information, again, you can get any questions that you may have also through to us.
Okay, well, any examples that you think about as we go along that seem to be particularly relevant, you just jump in there and tell us about them. I don't see any yet. I don't think anybody's brave enough to tell us anything outrageous that they've come across. Maybe they'll get braver as we go along. But let's move on to some of the key findings from the research. Fraud is on the rise. This is the key finding we want to point out first. Fraud is on the rise, with 77% of respondents reporting that either they or an organisation they know personally have been victim of fraud in the last 5 years. And that compares with 65% in 2024. So that's going up. And let's look a little deeper. 35% said their company experiences fraud attempts regularly. That is at least once a month. And 12% of those said their company has been a victim of expenses fraud. So clearly statistics there, but going up. Connie, why do you think expense fraud is a growing issue? And what's your best advice on how to prevent it? A little fuller detail on that.
Yeah, I think it's because people feel entitled to submit pretty much anything on an expense report. We've seen wedding dresses, we've seen engagement rings, we've seen funeral expenses, and everything in between. I think they're to the point where they feel they'll be told I couldn't submit this, so I'm going to try and submit it anyways until I get told no. That's my first. My other thing is, when we all went home for the pandemic, that was kind of that door was wide open for non-compliance, because some organizations allowed painting of an office, or putting in desks in an office. And we saw employees submitting the purchase/building of small homes, those a small house on their property, because the kids were all at home now. So I needed a place to go to where it could be quiet. And I'm not saying everything is wrong, because I'm not going to sit next to them in court as these things are working their way through. But I am going to call out, these are non-compliant things. These are unique, odd things that you might want to dig further into.
And Connie, don't you think as well it's to do with what's going on in the economy and how that's hitting people's pockets as well?
Agreed. I totally agree. Who's going to know? Who's going to know that I'm doing some of these things that I shouldn't be? Or on the flip side, it could also be an education thing. The employee didn't know they couldn't purchase a Coach purse as a laptop bag. Yeah, I didn't know. So again, it's people are really feeling entitled to be able to submit things. I mean, we see plastic surgery, and the employee justified it. Well, I'm in the front line. I need to look my best. So again, as I said earlier, they feel entitled. They feel as though, who's going to know? And I'm going to submit it until somebody tells me I can't.
So, but that sounds an extraordinary level of expenses that people are claiming. I mean, a huge amount. And surely there's a responsibility with companies to define amounts that they're prepared to, and maybe define a bit more closely what it can go to. Do you think that's got a bit hazy after, as you say, during lockdown, people were looking at different things to put expenses claims in for?
Correct. Absolutely. I think it's so important to make sure you have a solid travel and expense policy, and you train your employees, not only train them on the expense policy, but train them on non-compliance and what the cause and effect is. If you do X and it's a fraudulent thing, that could mean Y all the way up to termination. And so if you put that in your travel policy, your employees sign their travel policy saying, I've read it and I agree with it. They understand if I do something like this. And I think you have to give employees an opportunity to make an error and learn from that, but not continue with that same error.
But the benefit of a procurement card for expenses, be it a fuel card or a procurement card, is that you can block merchant categories. And I'm not sure that everyone, if that's well known or not, so that you could block some of the beauty destinations or liquor stores or depending on the store merchant type, that's one way of preventing it as well.
Correct. And those merchants are very creative as well because
Yeah.
they knew of the ability of things being blocked. So they may add food. Now they're considered a restaurant. So again, everybody is trying. Everyone's creative. Everyone's very creative. So we just have to stay ahead of that process.
Yeah. Surely, if people are being creative and trying to get around things or make things happen in collusion with a provider, for example, they know that that's not just ordinary and a bit of a mistake on a piece of paper, don't they? They know they're committing fraud.
Correct. On the flip side, I had an employee, not I had, but I had a client tell me about one of their employees. They had purchased concert tickets to go with their client to, and I have to apologize. They told me last week what the concert's name or what the name was of the concert, and I don't recall, but it was $8,000 that they submitted on the expense. And then the client didn't even show up. So they had two employees, two salespeople, and their wives go to this concert. Was that the best way to submit that $8,000? Was there opportunities to still sell those tickets when the client said they couldn't make it? Was that an opportunity to, how was that process other than it was caught by an audit process and then escalated within?
And that also has tax implications
Right.
on the employees as well.
Right. And was all that thought through when the salesperson said the client declined the concert? What do I do? Or did that sales rep say the client declined it, and so I just brought my partner in sales and our wives, and we still did the concert? Again, all of those details are taken into consideration to try and figure out non-compliance, fraudulent activities.
Okay. Well, certainly a discussion point.
Right.
On external fraud, 47% in the survey carried out in the research said that BEC or business email compromise was the most common fraud attempt that they're currently experiencing or experienced last year. 41% say that impersonation is the most common. So what sort of controls can finance leaders put in place to reduce the risk of those types of fraud?
Go ahead.
So I'll jump in there. And you might wonder why I'm going to start with the point that I am going to make, but it's about the management and the board. So fraud feeds off weak internal controls. So the responsibility needs ownership structure from the top to the bottom of an organization. That would be my first point. The onus doesn't sit on AP to resolve these things. Need to ensure that payments are not approved or made outside of the AP ledger. And we all probably have experienced quite senior people in organizations asking us to rush through a payment or a request outside of standard processes. But I would say there is, even if you get that request, it goes through as a document on AP and is properly approved and go through the right channels. most importantly, to promote a no verbal instruction to make a payment. So if you think about impersonation, if you start by putting the fundamentals in place, you should be able to prevent some of these things. If we move on to communications and how do we know who we're communicating with, there are standard courses that every company should be promoting on phishing. I can never remember all the different ones. Spearing is another one, and copycat websites. Again, we've all experienced copycat websites. Um, they often look professional, but there are warning signs. There are usually images on the website appear blurry or low quality. The text on the website is poorly written and there's usually errors, and there's missing contact details and links. And then what I would say is, again, if you don't know who you're talking to, maybe on the telephone, let's say, is to call them back, but don't call back the number that they're telling you. You refer to your AP contact and you in the contact detail. Nothing on the face of an invoice. You use what you've got on your master file. One thing that we're never going to get over is people clicking on attachments in emails. But what I would say there is about pausing and verifying. And, we all experience on a daily basis impersonation emails and texts. And it's about if using your instincts. If it doesn't feel right, then pause and don't do it. A CFO would prefer you to pay a supplier late than having to retrieve a fraudulent payment. So I think if you've got the fundamentals in place, together with your strong controls around your supplier master file, your data processing, your invoice processing, and your payments, I've missed an important one out, which is segregation of duties, access to systems, and also material approvers of documents, be it an invoice or a payment instruction. It's having that hierarchy in place for material values. So it's not just one area, it's a lot of areas.
Connie, is there anything you would want to add to that?
Right. I totally agree. Getting your leadership down to ensure that they're supporting all the activities is definitely key. And we were talking earlier a little bit about, employees and making sure they're submitting the correct things. We had an employee do a team retreat. It all sounds right, submitted it on his expense report, but in reality, it was over a long weekend. They did work activities on day one, and the remainder of the days, they worked on home improvements of that leadership. So again, it's one
Sorry.
of it's one of those things that the expense report had all of those expenses, but the employees were actually making home improvements. And because one of those employees came back and said, was that what that team building was all about? It got identified and escalated in. As for having multiple different corruption activities, and this will be kind of fun because Caroline, your pre-cruise time is here.
I am pre-cruise time. That's quite correct, Connie.
Right.
So nails and cruise.
Right, exactly. But we had an employee, it's a very innocent thing, ordered flowers through a florist. A colleague had a baby and they were going to send him flowers. Perfect. 2 days later, her manager came up and said, "You booked a cruise?" And she went, "No, but could I?" And they're like, "No, but a cruise was booked on your corporate card." So they backtracked it, identified the clerk at the florist had written down her card information when the flowers were being ordered, booked a cruise for her and her boyfriend. And then the port authorities and the police met them on the report prior to boarding the cruise, separated them, right? And said, boyfriend, how did you get this cruise? And he said, my girlfriend wanted through her work. He said, fine, you're kind of innocent in this process. Then they met with the clerk at the florist and said, how did you get this cruise? And she said, I didn't think I would get caught this fast. So again, intentional fraud was happening, and she just thought it was going to be over before, if she ever got caught.
Okay, so
And
questioning and curiosity from people looking through things is really important still.
Right.
and the red flags must have been in place for that to be picked up so quickly as well.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the second key finding from the report, finance teams report feeling more vulnerable due to inadequate tools and training. There's been a 20% decrease in teams training their fraud prevention measures as very effective, with only 35% holding this view in 2025 compared to 56% in 2024. So that's report jargon, but basically people are feeling more vulnerable and they don't feel that their fraud prevention measures are as good this year as they did last. So over 40% of the respondents expressed that they actively need more fraud training. That's how to detect it, I'm guessing or hoping, when it comes to training teams to be more vigilant and spot potential frauds. So what advice would you give finance leaders on how to approach this, Caroline?
I would start with a health check on my AP. I'm talking AP, but really it's P2P as well. So on my controls and my procedures and my policies, are they fit for the purpose? When was the last time they were reviewed? When was the last time they were reviewed for a fraud that's happened and updated and communicated? Number two, I would do a skills gap analysis, and that's on the skills within the team, including myself, and to identify where the weaknesses are in knowledge, and then target specific training on the areas, because fraud is a huge area, and how AP gets attacked with fraud is in various different places as well. So you can't just say, I'm going to do some fraud training. It's across the whole piece. But number two, I would have looked at my my AP function. Number two, I would look at the skills of my team. And I would also be trying to find out what best practice looks like as well, if I don't already know, from peers, from software providers as well. They're very good at feeding information on what does good, better, best look like. And then I would look to do some training. Now, in these times where costs factor into everything that we do, I would be looking to attend webinars like today's, Sue. I would be looking to go to conferences. I would be networking with my peers. Anything that I can do to find out what are the latest frauds. Reading LinkedIn on a daily. Connecting with people and organisations on LinkedIn. But from an IFO perspective, we have a fraud specialist course where we go through and teach the basics on fraud prevention and what you should be looking for. And in process at the moment is a fraud managers course. And one of the things I'm working on, and again, I'm not doing this to self-promote what IFAL are doing, but it's an opportunity to talk about it. One of the things we're doing is looking at putting a network of anti-fraud certification scheme in place. And that will do something similar to what I've just talked about. It will go through a health check questionnaire with you on your process and do various other different things as well. But you can hear from Connie's examples, the fraudsters don't work 9 to 5. They're continually looking to what's the next opportunity, and AI and technology will deliver a different type of fraud. You can guarantee it, and then we'll be talking about a different type of fraud again. So technology will increase the sophistication of the frauds, but it's about finding out where can I do training, where can I go for this, what companies can I talk to, but one of the main things that I talk about as well is about when you suffer a fraud, you ensure that people know about it. You don't keep quiet about it. You update your policies, your procedures, you look at your controls and what can I do?
Okay.
And that's about it, really. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Connie, no. What would you add to that
I
from
would totally agree. Everything that Caroline was just reviewing.
Yay.
The separation of duties. Make
Yeah,
sure that, someone's admin can't submit an expense report, then log in as her
manager.
executive and approve her own reports. It's a simple process, but it happens all the time.
Yeah. And master file is a good one as well. People think that a simple, oh, I'll get, I need to amend a supplier's address, let's say. That needs to be audited by two people, not just the person doing it, but someone auditing and verifying, because obviously we know that the sequence of events of changing on a master file will lead to fraud if it's not done, if you don't look out for those types of things.
Okay. Let's move on to key finding 3. We're galloping through this, but more information is available, as we've said earlier. So it's just highlighting some of the things at the moment. The third key finding we want to highlight today: there is no clear trend towards the adoption of AI-driven fraud prevention technology. A substantial 71% of respondents say they don't use AI in any spend management processes, and just 18% use fraud detection software. And that's what the response was telling us. I mean, there may be in the background some AI being used that they might not know about, but that's what people feel is happening. So around 65% of respondents say it would take a few days to a few months to identify fraud. So a question to you: do you believe that AI can make the difference in detecting and preventing fraud? And if you do, would you say companies are being a bit slow to adopt AI-driven tools? Connie, do you have any thoughts about this?
We've had our compliance program using AI for 15 years already. And I totally agree. When our auditors were first, asked, how many of you love to audit? Is the date correct? 10,000 times a day. Nobody raised their hand. I'm like, great, let's have the AI do that. Let the AI look through the easy compliance checks, alcohol, extra baggage fees, all of those easy checks, and then let the auditors dig more into the more compliance issues. And when I say auditors, that's either using our internal global auditors, or that's through our intelligent audit service, or if you have your own internal audit team and you want to keep them, then we have a service called Verify, where we can have the technology, the AI/ML technology, run through 100% of the reports and then send you anything, and your internal audit team can research those items. So again, the technology helps us weed through the haystack and only identifies the needles that need additional attention. So I absolutely love that technology. Plus, as we're learning, the technology is getting smarter because, as I said, those fraudsters out there are pushing that envelope, and we need to stay ahead of it. So every time we find something, we need to be sure that technology is updated as well.
Okay. Caroline, what's your view on the place of AI?
Yeah, I think there's two things here. I think sometimes people have absolutely no knowledge what it can do for you. That would be my first comment. And I'm going to say that awful word, budgets. If we ignore the budget thing at the moment, because it is a sign of the times at the moment, if we take invoice processing, for example, again, terminology has changed. Connie's just said she was using AI. Was it 16 years ago?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah,
internally, we definitely
yeah.
have
And
been.
we were using workflows. So it's just come on another level. But if we talk about invoice processing using AI, AI can now, by using historic data, can look at an invoice. It can look at the historic data. It can tell you the patterns and the trends. It can look at a spike. It can tell you if the face of the invoice has been altered. It can automate, I won't talk about what I call the standard stuff about returning a non-PO invoice to a supplier. It's about looking at that historic data and doing things that a human cannot. By putting a bum on a seat, you will only see a one-off, let's just say, a fraudulent action. If you've got AI working for you in the background, by looking at patterns and trends and all the other sexy stuff, as I call it, it can find loads of different things. And I don't think people, that's just one example. I don't think people understand, where the world is moving and what it can do. Is that fair, Connie?
Totally agree. Totally agree. And I'm just trying to remember who the author was, but there's a quote out there. If you think fraud is expensive, or sorry, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have a client admin who told me she printed it, put it on her wall in her office. And every year when her leadership comes in and says, we need to talk about budgets, where can we cut? What can we do? She just points at that message. I'm not touching our compliance program because we will lose across the board more with it. So,
Yeah.
yes.
And one of the things that gets bandied about in the UK is that fraud expectation, I think it's 0.05% of your turnover. Well, if you want to quantify that in a large organization and spending a small amount on introducing AI and some of the other fraud detection technology versus getting hit with a large fraud and then thinking about considering it, it is an absolute no-brainer.
So you've identified that, perhaps people don't know what it can do and what can be identified much more efficiently and effectively. You've identified very briefly perhaps the problems of cost, finding the budget for it, persuading somebody that it needs that budget. But do you think the historic, if you like, resistance to AI, people were, maybe they know now that they'll be needed as well, but worried about their jobs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of like I said earlier, the auditors were concerned about their jobs because technology coming in, but now they're working on the more complex criteria and they love that. I mean, as I said, they let the technology take those things they didn't really enjoy working on. And again, I can't repeat enough. Having technology help us is the way that everything is going.
It also gives the auditors the opportunity to have a larger test
Correct.
as well, because
Yep.
you're not doing the mundane and you're letting the AI do that for you. It allows you to do a larger test onto the data as well. So
100% agree.
yeah.
And we do 100% of all the expense reports coming in. We let the technology run through it all. Mm-hmm.
And so are you finding less resistance? Are people actually beginning to realize much more that AI is a much more subtle tool and it is useful in with teams rather than just replacing them?
Correct, correct. And, for the most part, organizations are not worrying about that, letting people go. They're putting those people in, looking at all the reports, looking at the results of the audit compliance, digging into them. I mean, we have reports that say, here are your employees, and they're ranked by how much non-compliance they're doing. And in the past, they didn't have time to look into all of those. They didn't have time to look into what are the things that employees are causing non-compliance in and digging into them. So again, I think it's making compliance programs stronger because of the technology allowing people to have more time to do more.
And I think also, Sue, we've seen in the UK, I'm sure you have in the US as well, the pressure on businesses on payroll at this moment in time. And if you can go to your CFO and say, by investing in X, Y, and Z, again, the data you sat on in shared services, is, going to use one of my lovely words now, humongous. Take my supplier base. If I can categorize it by spend, by payment terms, by country, I can look at working capital opportunities. I can do lots and lots of great stuff and look at cash flow forecasting, paying on time, getting through things through quicker, making my cash work for me in the bank. There is just so much can be done by the data that you sat on, and investing in not just AI but fraud prevention programs as well. And I certainly would be one of the first ones sat in front of the CFO going, me, please, sir.
Or madam.
Yeah, or madam, sorry, being sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay, we've just got a few more minutes. So given that not every company, every team is in exactly the same place to be able to say, well, let's adopt this, let's do that. What's your best advice for action that clearly needs to be taken now, for reducing the risk of fraud? What would you say to people that say, well, I can't quite do that at the moment, or I can't quite do that? What would both of you, shall we start with Connie?
So for me, I would say having, if you have a miscellaneous or other expense type, whatever, 100% review those. Those are the expense types that people put those, I don't know, or I want to hide this in here. Or I may have a meal limit and here's the leftover meal expenses that I couldn't put in my meal limit. So again, look at reporting. Reporting is so key, is very key. And for me, if you do have additional questions after today's process, do reach out to, concur.com for more answers, or we're here to help. We're here to help.
Caroline, what would you suggest people get on with now?
The first thing I would do is go back to basics, and know. So I'm going to cough. and know who you're hiring. That would be one of my first bits of advice. I would look at staff training and introduce a fraud education program. I would look at again, looking at my core controls. I would look at my system access approval hierarchy. I would be continually monitoring my processes and having reporting if, there's a case with dashboards, looking for spikes and red flags. One of the things I promote is spot audits. Why waiting until internal audit come in twice a year? I would audit on a monthly basis, pick a process, make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and haven't got their own little notes that they're following. And prevention versus recovery. Trust your instincts, and if it doesn't feel right, it probably not. That would be my advice.
I love those. I really do. The instinct thing is so key. And if you think you shouldn't be submitting this on an expense report, you probably shouldn't be. Not that that will ever change, because we're going to have our jobs forever because of the fraudulent opportunity out there and non-compliance. But yes, I 100% agree with your recommendations.
And presumably on the issue of those things going through, you would tell people that they shouldn't be put under pressure to do anything quickly, and with sort of exceptions to the process they know they should be using.
No, it's process controls, Sue. Process. My daughter laughs at me because I go controls. But that's how I was educated. So, and it's worked for me.
Any final word from you, Connie?
Again, totally agree. If you don't think you have a strong compliance program, get one in. Don't wait. Push to get something in, because there's too much revenue that goes out the door without anybody realizing, and nobody wants that. Nobody, I'm going to date myself, but nobody wants their company in the paper with a negative tone to it. So let's make sure all of those things are caught prior to any spend occurs.
Thank you very much indeed. So a big thank you. Caroline Adams from our IFOL team and Connie Hain and sponsors SAP Concur. Thanks to you too, Connie. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Concur.com for further from SAP Concur. More information on membership and courses available on the IFOL website. And this webinar will be available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. So please share with any colleagues you feel may be interested. Thanks again for joining us and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.